Hi everyone, I am Jeff Rosen, the head of the National Constitution Center, and welcome to the new American Treasures Gallery. I am so excited to be able to show you, for the first time in American history, the 5 most constitutionally significant drafts of the US Constitution, displayed together for the first time ever. Not even at the Constitutional Convention were all these drafts displayed at the same time. We opened this new gallery here at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia today, and it's so exciting to be able to show this to you and to compare the text of the documents, which we're going to do in a moment. What we have to do is begin by talking about James Wilson, because he is the forgotten founder who in many ways was the most important constitutional philosopher of the Constitutional Convention. He is the founder who wrote many of the drafts you're about to see. And when I was in law school, I learned that Wilson was, in some ways, even more significant than James Madison, because Wilson was the great theorist of popular sovereignty. Here's a picture of him right behind me, and it says, "Meet James Wilson," in this beautiful picture. He looks very impressive. He had an incredible life after transforming the notions of popular sovereignty at the Constitutional Convention and writing the drafts you're about to see. He went on to be a justice of the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, he died, as you'll see, in debt. He was fleeing from his creditors, but we say here that he deserves recognition as one of the most important constitutional philosophers in American history. Why? Because Wilson came up with the idea that we, the people of the United States as a whole, were sovereign, rather than we, the people of the individual states, and rather than the king and parliament, as had been the case in Britain. That fundamental shift in notions of popular sovereignty allowed Lincoln, during the Civil War, to resist the idea that the southern states could secede from the Union. Because Lincoln said, since we, the people of the United States as a whole, had formed the Union, then a majority of we, the people of the United States as a whole, needed to consent to any changes in the Union, and an individual state, since it was not sovereign, couldn't unilaterally decide to leave the Union. This is a huge shift. Under the British system, it was Parliament that was sovereign. Wilson says that we, the people, are sovereign, and that's also the very nature of limited government, because since we are sovereign and we're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable or natural rights that come from God or nature and not government, then government can't infringe those rights, and if it does, then we have the right and duty to alter and abolish it. You may have been reading recently about this new draft of the Declaration of Independence that was discovered in Britain, supposedly commissioned by Wilson to show the connection between the natural rights enumerated in the Declaration with those in the Constitution. Okay, what I want to do is show you these astonishing drafts. I'm obviously very excited about the National Constitution Center, as you know, if you've tuned in before or been here, but I just think it's amazing to have this opportunity to display these documents. This is a result of an amazing collaboration between the Constitution Center and the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, which has long owned these priceless documents and has decided it's important for the public to be able to see them, so they're loaning them to the Constitution Center for a long-term loan, and also the generosity of our great board member, David Rubenstein, who's also lent us some incredibly rare copies of the Bill of Rights that I'm about to show you. Let's begin with this report of the Convention's resolutions, July 24th, 1787. This is basically the very first draft of the Constitution. It's the first time that anyone has taken pen to paper to try to consolidate the consensus of the delegates who've been meeting in secret, have already worked out the Connecticut Compromise between the big states and the small states that says that the small states will be represented in the Senate and the big states in the House. But there are a couple really striking things about this draft. And after I've showed you the paper copies, we're going to go to an incredible interactive, which is behind me and which you'll be able to check out online when it goes live next week, where we can closely compare the text of the various drafts and see how the thinking of the framers evolved. But some obvious big striking things here. First, there's no preamble. The beginning of the document reads, and I need my constitutional reading glasses, and we could go, well, you know what, here, I'm going to show you this interactive right now, because it's so neat. So here we have the texts of all these documents that you're looking at. So here's the report of the Convention's resolutions, and the very first draft, the sentence of the Wilson draft says, "Resolved that the government of the United States ought to consist of a supreme legislative, judiciary, and executive." If you click on the annotation. It says there's no preamble. As their first resolution, the framers agreed that the government would consist of 3 branches that would share power: legislative, judicial, and executive. What are some other really interesting differences between this draft and the final version? Well, here's the president. It says the framers decided on a 6-year term for a single national executive. This would change several times during the drafting process, often tied to the debates over the method for selecting the president. Let's actually just, for comparison's sake, there's obviously so much more to say about this document, and here we highlight a couple other big differences, which you can also see in the interactive, which will be live next week by May 11th, at the latest. That's the deadline, at constitutioncenter.org/treasures, and you'll be able to compare the text of these documents by yourself. But here we note a few other differences. There are no specific congressional powers listed, but there's a principle that Congress can make laws for the general interests of the Union. That's a precursor of what became what's called the necessary and proper clause, which allows Congress to pass all laws that are necessary and proper for carrying out its enumerated powers. And we talked about the presidential term and lack of preamble, and there's some other interesting things, including the nature of apportionment, which was supposed to be based on people subject to direct taxation. That excluded enslaved people and was an unfortunate precursor to the infamous 3/5 compromise. So this is Wilson's very first draft. It's coming out of the committee. It lists the resolutions that the delegates debated during the first 2 months, and Wilson was on this committee with 4 other delegates. He used this to create the next version of the text. It is one of the most significant constitutional documents in American history. Friends, this is the original, I'm standing in front of it. Isn't this exciting to be able to see Wilson's handwriting in the very first draft of the U.S. Constitution displayed here for the first time? And what's so exciting is to be able to compare it with the next draft. So we're now going to move to Wilson's second draft. And this is called the Manuscript of the Committee of Detail Report. This is August 3rd, 1787. Wilson wrote this during a 10-day break. Again, there are 5 members representing different geographic interests, and they incorporated edits, and this is beginning to look more like the actual final draft of the Constitution. Here, the most constitutionally significant fact, and I think we can go to the back to see the printed version of it. Here it is. This is the proof copy, which basically there's a printing press that seems to be able to churn things out as quickly as a word processor, because they would publish printed versions on the same day as the drafts were published, and this is published the day after. This is the proof copy. We can read it a little better, and we'll go to the interactive in a moment. But look at the most important part. We have a preamble to the Constitution for the first time. But look what it says. We, the people of the states of New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Providence Plantation, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, do ordain, declare, and establish the following Constitution for the government of ourselves and our posterity. So that sounds something like the final version of the preamble, but it doesn't have the language about establish justice, defend the general welfare, and so forth. But obviously the most significant difference is it says we the people of the individual states of New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and so forth, rather than we the people of the United States as a whole. That shift, and since we're talking about it, let's jump ahead to the Committee of Style report, September 12th. That last proof copy was August 4th. By September 12th, we have the Committee of Style, which has the preamble that says, we the people of the United States, rather than we the people of the states of New Hampshire and Massachusetts and so forth. It's impossible to say for sure whether Wilson was responsible for that change, since he was not on the Committee of Style, which was basically, this is Jacob Broom's annotations. It's the almost final draft to the Constitution. This is a really high power committee that includes James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, Gouverneur Morris, who is credited with polishing the draft. But we believe that Wilson's philosophy very much influenced the change from we the people of the states of New Hampshire and so forth to we the people of the United States, and that language encapsulates Wilson's immortal contribution, which is the sovereignty of we the people of the United States as a whole. This Broom draft is very cool because it does include some annotations, literally last-minute additions to the final Constitution, including, you see, in the description of the impeachment process. It talks about if any vacancies happen by resignation or otherwise during the recess of the legislature, the executive can make temporary appointments until the next meeting of the legislature, which shall then fill such vacancies. And then the impeachment provision says the Senate can try impeachments when fitting for that purpose. They shall be on oath, and the Broom annotation is or affirmation, which was a respect for the scruples of Quakers who didn't want to take oaths. And there it is, literally a little carrot handwritten into the Constitution on September 12th. And then look at this printing. Isn't this amazing that all these documents are in the same place? It's so cool. This is September 17th, 1787, the day the Constitution is actually proposed. There's another proof copy, which is cranked out by these printers. The printers are Dunlop and Claypool. The Dunlop was the printer who published the Dunlop copy of the Declaration of Independence, which was the most priceless original copy, as well as the publisher of the Pennsylvania Packet newspaper, which we have upstairs at the Constitution Center, which printed the Constitution for the first time so that we the people could read and debate it. But this was the proof copy for the delegates to debate. It's so pristine. There are about 14 of them that survive, and by this point, all of the changes have been incorporated, but there are a few changes at the very last minute that are included, including the ability of the Congress to override the president's veto. The number is lowered from 3/4 to 2/3. There's the amendment process is filled out so that you can propose amendments by demanding a convention of the states, as well as by a congressional proposal. And there's a provision that says that the states can't deny equal representation in the Senate without the states' consent, entrenching the representation in the Senate in a way that some scholars say might be unconstitutional, but the idea of an unconstitutional constitutional provision is itself highly contested. So you've just gotten a sense of the thrill of seeing these 5 documents in one place. Now let's go back to the interactive and do some more textual comparison. And once again, I want you to tune in next week when you can, Diana, you can definitely show the documents as I'm walking over. Just so, and there's this one beautiful, look at the beautiful artwork, and we're trying to tell the story of the convention from May to June to August to September as beautifully and economically as we can in this new gallery here at the National Constitution Center. But let's just look at a few more textual comparisons. We were talking about the presidency last time, and we looked at Wilson's first draft in the manuscript of the committee in detail on August 3rd. Now let's look at the proof copy, or why not the manuscript, because that's the handwritten version. We talked about the changes in the preamble. Now let's look at how the notion of the presidency evolved. And here we go. Let's see if I can find it. This is interesting. Originally, only the Senate could appoint judges, not the president. Then the Senate gets a new treaty-making power, and in later drafts, of course, the president appoints judges and makes treaties by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. But here, look at this. Here's the next version of the presidency. Let's read it. The executive power of the United States shall be vested in a single person. His style shall be the President of the United States of America, and his title shall be His Excellency. He shall be elected by ballot by the legislature. He shall hold his office during a term of 7 years, but shall not be elected a second time. So this is really interesting. James Wilson, who's much more of a populist than James Madison, wants direct election by the people. Madison wants election by the legislature. And in this draft, Wilson, who's basically transcribing the compromise, throws in the towel and has election by the legislature with a fixed term of 7 years, with no eligibility for re-election, but that evolves in later drafts into the Electoral College, which was Wilson's kind of Frankenstein monster compromise, which was less than the direct election he hoped for, but better than election by the legislature, as well as the possibility of re-election. The real concern is that Washington, everyone wants Washington to be the first president, and they don't want the president to be too dependent on the wiles of the legislature in the future when the president is not in Washington, which is why this provision is stricken. A few other cool changes. We begin to fill out the process for amending Article 5. And then we have the ratification process, but a blank space for the number of states required to approve the Constitution. The Articles of Confederation require unanimous consent, so the process that the convention came up with, 9 states for ratification, meant that the Constitution was illegal according to the ratification procedures of the Articles of Confederation, under which the convention was called. But that change in procedure was justified, according to Wilson and the other framers, by the idea that the right to alter and abolish government was a natural right that came from God or nature and not government, and that whenever government threatened the security of rights, it was the unalienable and indubitable right of the people to alter and abolish it. That language about the indubitable and unalienable right of the people to alter and abolish it, we can see in the first drafts of the Bill of Rights. And what I'm going to do now is show you the second part of this amazing gallery, which just opened yesterday and is one of the coolest new additions to the Constitution Center that has occurred since I came here. And these are the rarest original proof copies of the Bill of Rights. These are lent by our great board member, David Rubenstein, who also supported this gallery. These you can check out online when you go to those of you who've heard me before know what a traveling salesman I am for the amazing interactive Constitution. So go to the App Store, search for Interactive Constitution, and download this amazing free app. And here you see a couple things. First, you have the leading liberal and conservative scholars in America who, in a spot, here's my calendar is coming up as here, let's try it again. This amazing app is co-sponsored by the Federalist Society, the leading conservative and libertarian lawyers organization in America, and the American Constitution Society, the leading progressive organization. The College Board has made it the center of the new AP History and Government exams. It's got 10 million hits since it launched a year and a half ago or so. The leading liberal and conservative scholars in America are writing about every clause of the Constitution, describing what they agree about and what they disagree about. And what's relevant for these purposes, you can click on any provision in the Bill of Rights and see the Revolutionary Era state constitution that Madison drafted from, as well as the proposals that were made but not adopted. And here you have all of Madison's original proposals. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them that are here. Of course, there were 10 that were originally adopted, but the very first proposal of the Bill of Rights that Madison made contained 19 proposed amendments, because some of them were later consolidated. The printing is really small, but let's look at the amendment that Madison considered the most important in the entire bunch. And you can find this online at the Interactive Constitution. So this is it. This is the proposal that Madison thought was the most important in the bunch. It says, fifthly, that in Article 1st, Section 10, between clauses 1 and 2, be inserted this clause, to wit, no state shall violate the equal rights of conscience or the freedom of the press or the trial by jury in criminal cases. The Bill of Rights, as you know, applies to Congress. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech. But Madison thought certain natural rights of speech and conscience, for example, as well as rights of trial by jury, were so fundamental that states as well as Congress should be forbidden from violating them. That amendment did not pass, and it took the Civil War, the bloodiest in American history, and the passage of the 14th Amendment to apply the Bill of Rights against the states and to fulfill Madison's hopes. It's neat, isn't it, to see that the original Bill of Rights wasn't supposed to be a separate set of amendments at the end, but basically clauses that were inserted into the Constitution in the order in which they were supposed to go. So there wasn't any special significance to the fact that our First Amendment is first. In fact, the original First Amendment wasn't a free speech amendment at all. It was an amendment, and let's look at the 12 amendments that were actually passed by the House and Senate. Here's the original First Amendment, and it says basically that there should be one representative in Congress for every 30,000 inhabitants. If that had passed, there'd be, here it is, right here, it's called Article the First. If that had passed, there'd be 4,000 representatives today. Luckily, it didn't pass. Now, This is a priceless first printing of this amendment, but if you go upstairs at the Constitution Center, you can see one of the 12 surviving handwritten copies of the Bill of Rights sent by George Washington out to the states, which includes that original First Amendment, as well as the original Second Amendment, which wasn't the one involving the right to bear arms, but one that says that Congress can't raise its salary without an intervening election. That became the 27th Amendment in the 1990s. So our First Amendment was their third. And you can see the evolution of these amendments here in the gallery and online at constitutioncenter.org and at the interactive Constitution. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I hope I have whet your appetite to learn more about the incredible significance of these drafts of the Constitution. I want you, starting next week, to go online, constitutioncenter.org/treasures, and compare the details of the Wilson drafts and see how Wilson's notion of the Constitution evolved. I want you to go to the interactive Constitution and compare the drafts of the Bill of Rights. And mostly, of course, I want you also to come to the Constitution Center in Philadelphia. It's just so exciting. Today's a beautiful day. There are lots and lots of school kids who are here. And it's so inspiring just to be able to look at the original documents themselves, to imagine Wilson and the other framers debating them, and to be inspired by this incredible document of human freedom that unites us, the U.S. Constitution. Shall we end, Diana, with one last look at the Wilson draft itself and just looking at his handwriting and realizing how fast it all happened? I mean, isn't it amazing that the convention met in May and by September it passed the final version? And here it is, the handwritten very first draft of what would become the U.S. Constitution, written by that great constitutional philosopher, James Wilson. And it is such a thrill, my friends, to display it here at the Constitution Center and to be inspired from it and learn from it. Thanks so much. See you soon.